Hi, Deborah. How are you? Good morning, Deborah. How are you?
Mr. Rickard, how are you?
Mr. Rickard, wow, so formal. Well, maybe he's working his way up here, or who knows? Okay, let's take a look here. Joe, how you doing today? Good, good. Just fine.
Like a little bedroom suite here, would that be COVID-related expenses? She's here all.
We'll just clear out the back office there, put a bunk, you know. Make it a little bunkhouse.
Just stop thinking that there will be no short-term.
I can't hear anything. This is Mo Iqbal.
Good morning, Dr. Iqbal. This is Roger. I can hear you clear.
Okay, so meeting has not started yet?
No. We're still waiting for Chairman Hoshite, and if we do not get the chairman shortly, Bill Leonard said he'll fill in and get the meeting started, so we're going to give him another couple minutes.
Okay, good. I'm online. So.
We just don't get the cool little animation.
Thank you.
Morning, Mo. This is Angie.
Good morning, Angie.
Good morning.
Roger.
We have Chairman Hoshite. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Morning, John.
Set your clock ahead an hour, Deb, or what?
It's only by seconds.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee to order. I apologize for being late. This is my third meeting this morning, so I didn't sleep in. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Allen? Present. Paul?
Iqbal,
Iqbal here.
Leonard,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Surges, Thomas.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, we have a quorum. First item of business is approving the minutes from our June 24th meeting. Ms. Allen moves, Mr. Leonard seconds. Any corrections to the minutes or comments? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges, Thomas,
Yes.
Hoshay.
Yes, minutes are approved. Public comment, is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the committee this morning? Anyone listening in that would like to address the committee? Hearing none, we'll move on to the treasurer's report. Mr. Rickard.
Good morning. You have before you the June weighted average investment yield report. We're earning 0.84 basis points. We're looking at the investment opportunities continue to decline. We're looking at CDs and agencies at about 2 years out at 25 basis points, which means long-term our interest yield will continue to decline. The aggregate earnings versus budget as of June was down 60,000. But for the year, for all funds, it'll be down, we estimate around 700,000 and down about 100,000 specifically just for the general fund.
That is just a result of the current economic conditions, and we've been very aggressive with your help, Mr. Rickard, to maximize our return. I would say that if there's any good news with respect to for the taxpayers, it's that our bond interest rates have been correspondingly lower than we anticipated. So through refinances here and at the Forest Preserve District, there'll be significant reductions in the levy as it relates to debt service.
One good piece of news is our property tax collections are right on target. They're starting to pick up, and we don't anticipate a huge downfall as of this time with property tax collections.
Very good. Thank you for your report. Any questions of our treasurer, Ms. Allen?
I just wanted to say, we're still seeing $400,000 come in. That's certainly better than a stick in the eye.
Correct. We're taking every opportunity to find what advantages there are out there and maximize them for the county.
All right, any questions for Mr. Rickard? Hearing none, we'll move on to the finance director's report. Mr. Onzik.
Good morning, everyone. The financial reports for the month of June are included in the agenda packet. The variances that we have been tracking monthly, for the most part, are pretty much the same. One that we're concerned about that I can point out is in the coroner's area. At this point, year to date, they're looking to be about 13.6% over budget. And I understand the coroner has prepared a budget adjustment that will be submitted in the near future. And that is something that we normally do near the end of the year, each year. There's also an anomaly that has showed up, and that's with the Public Building Commission Fund. It's, in case anyone noticed, it is about $650,000 over budget in the transfer out line item, but that's just due to a timing difference between when the journal entries are posted regarding the financing and the transfers that took place and the budget adjustments that were required to be made. So once we get through the next month, that variance will disappear. Regarding the health insurance fund, at this point, we have collected almost $1.3 million more in contributions than has been expensed during the fiscal year. The rolling 12-month cash balance stands at about $5.3 million, and that balance seems to be hovering around $5.4 million. So it's been fairly consistent in that regard. And we continue to recommend that we allow the cash reserve to build up to as much as $9 million in order to provide protection for the possible liabilities that we may be faced if expenses are greater than normal. Regarding shared and direct state tax revenue, I think we're finally beginning to see the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shutdown that occurred. If you look at the summary that I've included, compared to what we had been expecting in terms of budget, we're almost $1.2 million below budget and about $1 million less than what we had collected last year. In terms of budget, most of that variance has to do with sales tax. And if you look at a year-to-year comparison, it has to do with sales tax and state income tax. The court security fee revenue, we had hoped that we'd start to see the impact of the increase in the fee that had been approved to take effect in April, and we expected to start to see that in June. But unfortunately, we're also seeing the impact of COVID-19 shutdown and the courts being shut down. So we're still running about 45% below budget in terms of that revenue collection. Each month I've provided a little update on the county share of state cannabis tax. It's just a small amount coming in each month, but people seem to be interested in that. It's only was about $3,000 for the month of June, and the year-to-date collection is almost $18,000. Regarding the contingency balances, they're unchanged from last month. Capital funds, I've tried to put a different breakdown than what we've been providing each month. Now I've broken it down by the building management portion, the information technology portion, and then the multi-use facility portion. So that information is broken out for you in the report. The mid-year projections, I have an update related to how much the projected deficit is. Since I prepared my report, we had a few more updates come in, and this was from the development department and county clerk's office. So that brought the projected deficit up to about $6 million. If we were to break that down a bit, roughly about $3.4 million of that has to do with non-payroll related COVID-19, non-payroll related COVID-19 expenses. So if the county board were to approve reimbursement for those expenses, that would bring the deficit down to roughly $2.6, $2.7 million. And really the only way to cover that, unless there are further expense reductions by the county between now and the end of the year, would be, excuse me, drawing down from the emergency fund. Another possibility would be if some portion of the payroll, the eligible payroll expenses that were related to COVID-19 were reimbursed by the county. That could also take care of that deficit. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Regarding the FY21 budget, at this point, and not everything is in there perfectly yet, but it's looking like the gap between revenue and expenditures within the general fund stands at $15 million. About $5 million of that gap is attributable to the reduction in revenue that's related to COVID-19 impact on the economy. That's going to carry forward into 2021. The other 10 million has to do with just the increases in expenditures, as well as some of the shifting of property tax revenue out of the general fund into the insurance liability fund, the FICA fund, and the IRMRF fund in order to cover expense increases on that side. So it's affecting general fund revenue, but really the underlying reason for that are the increase in expenditures and insurance liability, FICA, and IMRF. And more detail regarding that gap will be provided as we continue to focus on the budget in the next few weeks. And just a reminder, we need to have that budget gap closed by the end of September. For the purchasing report, the purchasing director is not here this morning, so I could just touch on a few highlights. The new bids and requests for proposals that were started on in the month of June had to do with pest control services, holiday lighting for Mill Creek, electrician services for building management, and handyman services for building management. The year-to-date cost savings for bids was $974,000, and there were vehicle auctions in the month of June, and the revenue brought in from that was $26,431. So that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So just a couple questions. The cannabis tax, you indicated that that was our share of the state's
Yes.
tax. The county also has its own tax on retail sales, and that should kick in soon?
It should kick in July 1st, and I believe then we'd start to see that coming in roughly in September, if I remember my timing correctly.
All right. Just to clarify, there's two components of that revenue source, what we get from the state and then our own tax that's implemented on the recreational side.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. One other housekeeping item I just want to point out to this committee and to Mr. Onzik is the CAC committee moves forward in their process. As a housekeeping matter, we need to set up a budget for that and probably have a budget resolution to authorize the expenditures. So that's something that we'll be working on to bring back. And you may be contacted by the state's attorney's office to deal with that. Okay?
Yes.
Any questions of our finance director? Sorry, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe, just to be clear for myself and others listening, the mid-year projections, even after some reimbursement, you said it's about 2.6 million, and that's for our budget for this year, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I just wanted to have it, okay.
Okay.
And just to clarify, the emergency fund that's available is how much?
There's $5 million in that. That's what we had set aside in the event there was a shortfall in revenue.
Just want to point that out. I know emergencies don't occur every year, although, I mean, this clearly is the type of an emergency we would have expected. It's kind of like the 100-year flood that happens every 3 years now. So prudent planning in a worst-case scenario, we have some reserves fund. The hope is not to have to use that if we can avoid it. But it's just good that we've kept that as part of our process. And the importance of maintaining that going forward is critical. All right, if there's no further questions, Mr. Hanson.
Good morning and thank you. Joe, in your second or third slide there, you showed approximately a $500,000 shortfall over projected state income tax receipts. Do you see that probably getting closer to anticipated numbers based on the extension for the filing date? Folks didn't have to pay until July the 15th.
I'm trying to remember. Okay. I know what you're saying.
I paid late. I paid on July the 15th.
Right. Yes, that has been taken into account, that delay in payment. So this was, I broke it down month by month going forward, and that has been taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Also, under your report, Mr. Onzik, is the 2021 budget. Did you cover that already, or would you like to provide additional information on that?
I've covered what I had to share, and it's a placeholder there in case there was further discussion by the committee on that.
That process continues to move forward, consistent with our prior practice. All right, let's move on to the new business portion of the agenda then. First resolution is authorizing emergency purchase affidavit for a postage machine. Ms. Allen moves. Mr. Leonard seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal. Iqbal. Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis, yes.
Burgess, Thomas,
Yes.
All right, resolution is approved. Item B is a resolution accepting the ComEd Green Region Grant and a budget adjustment in connection therewith for farm with pollinators. Mr. Sanchez moves. Ms. Allen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis, yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Resolution is approved. Item C is a resolution authorizing entering into grant agreements as set forth in the agenda. Mr. Leonard moves. Ms. Allen seconds. Discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Yes.
Thomas. Thomas? O'Shea?
Motion carries. Item D is a
Thomas, yes.
resolution authorizing a contract for Kane County Pest Control Services. Before I take a motion, we'll show Ms. Thomas voting yes on that prior motion. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Allen moves. Mr. Leonard seconds. Discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Motion carries. All right, the next four resolutions we'll vote on separately, but they all in part deal with the Mill Creek SSA, which we administer for them. The first is a resolution for a split contract for the county and Mill Creek SSA regarding electrician services. Moved by Mr. Leonard, second by Mr. Sanchez. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis, yes.
Thomas,
Thomas, yes.
Resolution's approved. Item F is a resolution for holiday lighting, something positive to think about, which is good. Mr. Leonard moves. Ms. Allen seconds. Discussion? Again, this is Mill Creek SSA. Hearing no discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Leonard,
Aye.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry.
Allen, yeah,
Aye.
Leonard,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis, yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Motion carries. Next is Mill Creek SSA contract for natural area monitoring services. Is there a motion to approve this? Mr. Sanchez moves. Ms. Allen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Resolution. is
Sturgis,
approved.
yes.
Sturgis, yes.
Sturgis, yes.
Yes, we hear you, Mr. Sturgis, loud and clear. You can only vote once.
You're killing me.
Yes, thank you. Item H is a resolution authorizing a contract for parkway tree and stump removal for the Mill Creek SSA. Ms. Allen moves, Mr. Leonard seconds. Discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis, yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
and O'Shea.
Motion carries. I is a resolution authorizing additional software with Tyler for the public safety system. Mr. Leonard moves. Mr. Sanchez seconds. Discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis, yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Resolution is approved. Resolution J actually appears on our agenda, but was to be sent first to the Administration Committee. So I'll entertain a motion to send this to administration, and then they can send it back to us. Mr. Leonard moves. Ms. Allen seconds. Any discussion? I'll take a voice vote on this. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Item K is a resolution expanding the GPS monitoring services and authorizing fees in connection therewith. Motion to approve. Mr. Sanchez moves. Ms. Allen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Surges, yes.
Thomas,
yes,
Resolution is approved. Item L is a resolution authorizing approval of the MAP, Kane County Community Health Assessments and identify priority areas for the Community Health Improvement Plan. Ms. Allen moves, Mr. Sanchez seconds. Any discussion? Ms. Allen?
I just wanted to remind everyone, this is something that we have to do, and the hospitals in the area also have to do it. And Director Jeffers has worked out for a couple of times now an agreement where we all do the assessment together and share the cost of it. And it's just a clever and cost-efficient thing that she did, paying attention to what the partners needed to do and pulling us all together. I just wanted to mention that.
Yes. Ms. Starrett?
It's on M. Sorry, not on L, on M.
All right, well, okay. So any further discussion on item L? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
yes,
Resolution is approved. Item M is a resolution amending the Resolution 20-219 that previously authorized a lease for the Kane County Sheriff's in-car camera systems. Mr. Leonard moves. Mr. Sanchez seconds. Discussion. Ms. Starrett?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Hushite. Quick question. With this, I'm not sure if the sheriff has mentioned, but is he going to apply within the DUI task force for funds for this as well?
Sheriff Hain is here this morning. Good morning.
Wonderful. Morning, Sheriff.
Good morning. Thank you for that question. So the Sheriff's Office does receive funds for DUI enforcement separate from the DUI task force. So we prefer to let that fund go towards the smaller municipalities that benefit from the county DUI task force. So as the president of that task force, again, I prefer to leave that fund alone and rely on our own internal funding we receive.
Great. Thank you so much, Sheriff.
You're welcome.
All right, any further discussion or questions on this resolution? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Surges, yes.
Thomas,
yes,
Resolution is approved. Item N is a resolution canceling the 2020 biometric screening due to COVID-19. Mr. Leonard moves. Ms. Allen seconds.
Surges, second.
Surges seconds. Discussion on this item? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Surges, yes.
Thomas,
yes,
Resolution is approved. Next resolution is approving hiring of a replacement personnel for the Division of Transportation. Mr. Leonard moves. Ms. Allen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Surges, yes.
Thomas,
yes,
Resolution is approved. Final resolution this morning is our monthly payment of claims. This is the claims for June 2020. Ms. Allen moves. Mr. Sanchez seconds. Any discussion or question regarding this month's claims? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Allen,
Aye.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Surges, yes.
Thomas,
yes,
Resolution is approved. We have no items under new business this morning. Next item is the auditor's report. Mr. Hunt. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. The auditor's report was included in your packet. We have a couple of additions.
Is your microphone on?
Microphone.
Yes, it is now.
That's-
Sorry. Wow, that's a good one. All right, the auditor's report is on file. About 2 weeks ago, we finished up the second quarter report that was electronically circulated to all the board members and stakeholders. It's published on the auditor's website. And we'll do an overview of that here in just a moment. We're still working on applications for Kane County Open Finance, and we invite you to visit it and provide us with feedback. A couple of late additions that were not available at the time this was put together. We will be meeting with the sheriff personnel next week to arrange an audit of the canteen account in cooperation with the Department of Corrections requirements. And after about 6 months worth of work, we are actually going live today with the Tyler Content Management System. And had just a brief press release. I'll just read it to you so that it will be picked up by all of the local media, I'm sure. Tyler Content Manager is a wonderful resource that will provide Kane County with benefits at multiple levels. TCM integrates directly and seamlessly into our existing ERP system, improving accuracy while saving time and money with a more efficient workflow on the front end. On the back end, TCM also provides a powerful document management and storage platform, and TCM aligns itself well with the Kane County Sustainability Plan by placing increased reliance on digital documents and reducing the consumption of paper and related printing supplies. I'd like to thank our partners from the Information Technologies team for the hundreds of hours spent in the collaborative effort to successfully launch the TCM product. And in a footnote, because my press secretary forgot to mention my own staff, I'd like to thank Debbie and Kristen and Mariola for their effort in this as well. We go live with this literally today. The first application is within our accounts payable system, and I'm really encouraged by the possibilities, because it's something that is going to, by virtue of the fact that things are going to be input and handled only once in the whole system, we're going to improve our accuracy. The workflow should be speeded up, and an unintended benefit of the remote working that we've been doing for the past maybe about 3 months now is that most of our AP coordinators have become familiar with having to scan their work product in as opposed to the physical document. So hopefully that will actually make the transition go a little bit smoother. So I will continue to keep you abreast of what happens there. As mentioned earlier, the auditor's quarterly report was finished up. Okay, thank you. For the second fiscal quarter, which ended May 31st. And I always start that off with just the actual mandate date that it comes from the state requirements of the duties of the county auditor. County-wide funds is the widest scope of the report. It includes both governmental funds and proprietary funds. You can see we started the year with 267 million. We ended the quarter with 327 million approximately. Throughout the report, you will see probably a bump that you might not notice it, but it stuck out to me because the CRF monies are received and included at this point as governmental special revenue funds. We've got about $92.9 million more than we would have ordinarily expected. So our countywide fund balance or any of the other categorical balances as of the end of the quarter are higher than we would have expected because that's included. So you can see here's the breakdown, governmental funds of 311 million. Again, that includes the 92 million. So we're the enterprise surcharge, enterprise general, and health insurance funds are not affected by that. Within the governmental funds, we have these 5 categories. And we started the year with 253.5 million in governmental funds, ended the quarter at the midpoint of the year with 311.8 million. The breakdown and the biggest component there are the non-major special revenue funds. That's where the CRF monies are included. So of the 189 million, 92.9 million are unexpected at this point, or certainly unbudgeted. Special revenue funds, we talked about this a few times. We did an audit of agency funds and have pulled all of those into their proper category, being special revenue funds. At the midpoint, they represent about $1.3 million worth of the balance. So the important fact is that we are now we are budgeting and reporting, and we are in accordance with GAAP, and our overall transparency has been enhanced by those changes. So I'm appreciative of the cooperation of all the people that are involved with that, and would encourage that to continue to be developed on a more regular basis so that we can once again avoid the management comment when the external auditors come. This is the breakdown of our total. You see the 311.8 million in total governmental funds. The largest chunk of that has some sort of restriction, and the extra note we've got there is to bring to your attention once again that the 92.9 million is included, but it's restricted at this point, and we have about $19.5 million that is unassigned available for budgeted expenses. Just a history of the tax levy by year, by individual fund. You can see it's been relatively constant, and hopefully we can continue that in the process in the future. The general fund is the main focus. Usually that's what we spend most of our time on in the budget development as well. We started the year with 65.3 million, ended the quarter with 44 million. General fund does not include that 92 million, so that's obviously why we don't see that same difference. Through the second quarter for the past 5 years, this gives you a breakdown of the funds by revenue sources. And it's interesting, at least to me, to see the trends within the various categories. This is the general fund balance as of on a quarterly basis, but by year over the last 5 years. So the most current quarter, there is the one that's in the middle, the second quarter with the blue column, 44.089. And you can see it's roughly where we would expect it to be, higher than 2015 and 16, but pretty much in keeping with the last 3 years. General fund is the largest component of our composite that we refer to as general fund. And then lastly, these haven't changed yet, but it's a requirement of the report that we talk on general obligation bonds and our tollway bond. And before we get into it, I'll just flash through. These are all the ones that were in existence at the beginning of the year. This is our chart as of the second quarter, projected through the end of the year. We recently closed on the multi-use bonds. That didn't close though until June, so that'll be recorded in the third quarter, not through the second quarter. So you'll be able to see a little bit of change in that when we report next. And this is a lot cooler when I can do the animations, but it is the same thing. It gives reference points for all of the activity. The green line is that overall debt that is our outstanding balance. The blue line are the retirements, and the little dots indicate where we had issued bonds. That just cleans it up. Toll Ridge bonds, because they spread out so far and we're not paying principal for a couple of years yet, we just broke this down into 5-year increments. And I believe if I can make this advance one more time, well, maybe not. Okay, that would be the end. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, I would respectfully submit my report.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Any questions of our auditor? Okay, next item is the resolution to place on file the reports this morning from our treasurer, finance director, and auditor. Ms. Allen moves, Mr. Leonard seconds. Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. And we do not need executive session this morning, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgis, just a quick question for you. I noticed that at last night's meeting, Circuit Clerk had mentioned Tyler Enterprises as one of the vendors that they use. This morning, in one of the resolutions, we mentioned Tyler, and then Auditor Hunt again mentioned Tyler. Is Tyler synonymous with New World? Is that the same vendor?
Roger can answer that.
So Tyler Corporation is the parent company for many government software services and licensing. So we own Tyler products for Tyler Court Odyssey. We own Tyler for the public safety and jail, for 911, and for finance.
So to be more specific, is Tyler affiliated with New World?
They're the parent company for New World.
Of New World. Okay. I just want to go on record stating that I am having nothing but difficulty within my committee on a specific project to get New World on the line, cooperating, communicating, and boy, just in the past 24 hours, we seem to spend a lot of money with this company, and to not be able to get a representative, that I'm disappointed beyond belief, and I want that on the record.
So noted.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Now we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Clerk, please call the roll. Yeah, we have a second. I did one and who seconded? Alan seconded. Motion to adjourn.
Did I?
Please call the
Okay.
roll.
Allen? Allen?
Aye.
Iqbal? Leonard? Sanchez?
Yes.
Sturgis?
Yes.
Thomas? O'Shea?
Yes, the Finance and Budget Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning.
And he had other school work. He leverages relationships. I can't really understand, right? It's friendly. Okay. I'll talk to you later. You were also going to mention about how wet.
Good morning, everybody that's joining us online. If you are joining us online, we just ask that you mute your microphone unless you're called on to speak or you need to speak. We're going to be getting started in about 3 minutes.
Scott? Mr. Fries, how are you?
Sorry, I need my mic on. We're going to get started with the Riverboat Committee meeting in just 1 minute. If you are on a phone or on the Zoom connection, please mute your microphone unless you're speaking. That'll just help us with the background noise.
All right, it's 10 o'clock. Sorry, it's 10 o'clock. We'll call the Riverboat Committee meeting to order. Ask that the clerk please call the roll.
O'Shea,
Here.
Allen,
Present.
Iqbal. Present. Leonard. Here. Lewis.
All right, we have a quorum. First item of business is approval of the minutes of our May 14th meeting. Ms. Allen moves approval. Mr. Leonard seconds. Discussion? Hearing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Houshait.
Yes.
Allen.
Aye.
Iqbal.
Yes.
Leonard.
Yes.
Lewis.
All right, the minutes are approved. First item of business is approval of the 2021 departmental applications. We have before us, or before the meeting, we were given a list of the proposed allocations that were circulated to the committee members. They provided feedback. Before we get started, I'd like maybe Mr. Dahl or Mr. Berger to address the committee about the big picture, where we were from a budget and where we're headed and what decisions we're to make today. Just by background, you'll recall that in the last 3 or 4 years, we had adopted a multi-year approach to dealing with internal and external grant that took into account the declining revenue that we were receiving from the Riverboat. And the purpose was to try to maintain a steady flow of resources to both the outside and internal entities to make the fund last. Last year, we had a positive blip in terms of the revenue that came in, which was a somewhat unexpected, but a significant positive note. But of course, this year, and we don't have the numbers yet, but because of the COVID situation, the Riverboat was closed for a period of time and now is open with limited social distancing criteria. So the expectation for next year would be a significant reduction, perhaps half or maybe even less than that of what we had planned. So the fact that we have done this multi-year program makes us nimble and able to adjust to it. But with that background, I'll let Mr. Berger address the committee.
Well, that actually is a very good summary of the background. You're right. We prepared a multi-year projection about 7 years ago, calling for a gradual reduction in spending to more closely align with your annual revenue from the casino. A couple of years ago, we adopted the approach of utilizing our most recent revenue amount as the basis of our next year's budget. And so earlier this year, we did receive a surprisingly large allocation of $4.2 million from the casino that was above what we had projected. However, Mr. Houshait just referenced the fact that the casino has been closed for a quarter of a year and will be finishing out the remainder of this calendar year under social distancing standards, which we would only project would perhaps diminish their possible revenue. So we are expecting that next spring, your Riverboat revenues will likely be down, and we are projecting half of what we received earlier this year. So I think the challenge before you as you review internal applications for 2021 is to just keep in mind that the fund will likely have a diminishing fund balance, and in future budget years, there will be likely a need to reduce spending. Many of the projects that you have before you today are for, in essence, operating support. So the departments use these funds to pay for payroll and operating expenses in their departments. So it's difficult for them to make a dramatic change to their program management and spending without some advance notice from you. So just bear that in mind as you consider the request before you.
All right, now, Scott, with respect to this year, had we not had this blip, what was the budgeted amount for internal grants that we had set aside for the 2021 year?
We had budgeted for 2021 a relatively small annual budget of less than $3 million. And we have prepared a draft budget for you, which is in your packet, which far exceeds that, as you can tell. Our projections, keep in mind, we're 6, 7 years old now, so we're deviating substantially from what we had expected.
All right, so our our planned budget was 3 million, there was 3.4 million requested, is that?
And again, I'm referring to the overall budget for Fund 120. Closer? Okay, I thought it was too close.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, so then walk us through the process that staff has requested the committee members to proceed with, and then get us to the point where we have the feedback from the committee.
So the process that we followed this year to get you to today was to provide you with year-end reports from all the departments regarding their November 30th, 2019 status. So you have one packet from us that captures where the departments were on November 30th of 2019. We gave you a second packet that contains their mid-year projections midway through fiscal 2020, as well as their request for 2021 resources to continue their programs. We provided those to you along with a spreadsheet, and all the departments, well, many of the departments, I should say, utilize, as you'll recall, funds that they already have in their possession. We refer to that as cash on hand, as well as depending on you for deposits of additional funding for the new fiscal year. So all of their budget requests are broken out along those lines, and we provided you with a worksheet that asked you to independently prepare your own recommendations for how you would allocate resources. We took those figures from you and we averaged them, and the document that Chris emailed you yesterday afternoon, which you have before you this morning, literally represents the average recommendations that you all independently came up with.
Can we show that on the screen? Do you have that for us?
I don't think we have it in the packet. We can, it might be on the flash drive and we can supply that to you. That is the large 11 by 17 inch document that we have right here.
Right.
And you should all have one of these. We can put that on the screen in a minute.
Background, Scott, is before you go forward, is as we look at the list of projects or programs that were presented, the question comes up frequently as to where did those projects come from and what's the background as to how they got into this system. When the original agreement was entered into with the Grand Victoria Foundation, there were a list of projects that were targeted as not mandated, but permissible and or encouraged as part of the agreement. And if you have that original agreement, in which we have been periodically given copies of as this committee has met over the years, you'll see, it's basically a checklist of those programs that were anticipated we would create or fund. So these weren't created out of the blue. They were created with input from the then existing county board at the time the original agreement was in place, in concert with the representatives of the foundation. So that's why this list appears in the format that it does. Okay. So with that background, then, Mr. Berger, we do have on the screen the sheet that, or the summary that we had asked for. Is that correct?
We do have that on the screen. It's a little small right now. Roger, if you could zoom in slightly or eliminate the right-hand side
Mine's even
toolbar.
smaller, so I can still.
Yeah.
All right.
So you do have 8 departments seeking funding.
Right.
None of these projects are new. You have funded all of them in the past, and they are simply have been resubmitted to you for fiscal 2021 consideration.
All right, so with respect to, just to follow up on your comments, Scott, with respect to the, we do have projects in here that are operations and then those that we can consider capital. And just going down the list, human resources, that is a program that provides tuition reimbursement assistance to county employees for continuing their education. And that program's existed since the time. The next 5 items that come to us from the state's attorney's office are all operational in nature. Kane Cares is funding for the program for the health department. That would be considered operational. The web technical services that we get for IT department our fees that we pay on an annual basis, and that's keeping our website up and providing information to the public could be considered operational. The Economic Development Department, our funding is for programs run through the County Development Department for education and whatnot. The next two items are more capital in nature. The Water Resource Department, those are the cost share drainage program is an annual program that we have in place to help community or neighborhoods or areas that are primarily in the unincorporated areas to help fix existing drainage problems, usually with participation from the neighborhoods and or the townships to help those projects go forward. I would consider that capital. Obviously, the stream gauges, that's a capital program. Quality of cane grants, that is probably considered more capital because those grants don't fund an ongoing operation. It's grants that we provide to businesses. Farmland preservation is certainly capital. That's buying development rights and preserving land in the rural areas of the county. The recycling program is an operational expense, and the community outreach coordinator's position that's on this list is also what I'll consider operational in nature, in that we're paying for a program and wages in connection therewith. One question I would ask is that, using the program where we do average funding, we can see that we've got $2.8 million has been recommended by the committee as far as expenditures. I guess that would be within the budget parameters that we set for this year. Is that correct, Mr. Berger?
You're referring to our 7-year-old projections?
Yes.
No, we're off the 7-year projection at this point.
Okay, higher or lower?
This is higher than what we expected.
All right, but it's lower than was significantly lower than was requested.
Correct.
3.4 million. First thing I'd ask is, I just a couple things to point out. Obviously, the state's attorney's budget is impacted significantly by these grants, and as we saw the requests that were submitted last night in our budget presentation, the state's attorney's asking for more resources. Obviously, if we reduce the requests that have been made here, that will have a further negative impact on the state's attorney's budget. So that's just something we need to keep in mind. There are programs or projects that in here that if we, unlike an external grant where someone says, I want to rehab the History Center in Geneva, for example, and I'm asking for $50,000, if we can allocate $25,000, they'll gladly accept that because they'll continue to raise funds elsewhere. There are certain items here that it's kind of an all or nothing funding process, because if we don't provide the full funding, then the project would theoretically go away. So the one item that I'm pointing to is the community outreach coordinator. That is a budget item, for example, that if we don't, that we've provided what was originally matching funding with the county to continue to fund that program. So if we take the average and only provided the amount that is in the average column for that program, that would effectively not be enough to fund that program. So that would be something that we would probably want to fund all or nothing if we were going to do that. It looks like the majority of the committee took the position that that was not a priority, but I just point that out. Are there any others on this sheet, Scott, that you are aware of that would be, that if we cut the funding back, it wouldn't allow the program to go forward?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. Farmland preservation, for example, the money we provide gives Janice the ability to go out and identify either more property or less property. So same with the stormwater cost share drainage projects and the like. So as we have done in the prior committee meetings regarding our external requests, this committee needs to move recommendation onto the board to incorporate into a budget for next year what we plan on and funding from an internal perspective. Is there any discussion on the recommendations that are in the column on the right-hand side? Any questions of the committee? Ms. Allen?
Actually, I have a different kind of question for Scott. In my head, I think of the money that's described as cash on hand as being money that we have distributed previously and is just sitting there. So when we pull it out and use it, I don't think of it as being part of this year's spending. In other words, the money that we got from the casino in April, I think of this as being old money as opposed to new money. So when we come down to a bottom line of 2.8 million, I think of 600,000 of that as being money we had previously distributed but are now using. And so it's the 2.2 million is the new money that we're spending that we just got in April. Is that too far off base?
No, you characterized that perfectly. Part of the reason that we've been sharing the cash on hand information with you for several years now is because as you authorize the departments to use those dollars that you've previously transferred and are now, in essence, permitting them to spend in their budget, you'll notice that the first column of figures, which is the projected unobligated fund balance, and we've been sharing that with you year in and year out, those numbers obviously are going down because the gas tank is being drained. So the reason this is important to you is because of the longer term view of how you're managing your resources, because the last column on this spreadsheet represents the total price tag of the programs. And at the point that there's no cash on hand in the department's funds to draw on, we're expecting that you should expect the full cost of the projects to come to you for consideration for funding. So the cash on hand being available has been very helpful to allow us to soften the landing and soften the reductions over the years, which has been what we've been talking about for several years now. But, you know, in the back of all of our minds, we need to remember there is a full cost of what these programs cost the county. And at the point that the departments don't have any existing resources in their possession to pay for those programs, we presume they will ask you to pay the full cost from Fund 120, the Riverboat Fund.
I just, to that point, as one member of this committee, when I filled out my sheet, I required anyone that had cash on hand to use that first. And I guess I wonder, for a topic of discussion here, why we wouldn't take that approach. And why would we leave, particularly when we have a year where we expect that revenue is going to be off, why would we carry over a cash on hand balance, unless it was committed? Now, I know farmland preservation's kind of a different animal. They have committed properties, but the rest of these projects are these, for example, the operational projects, if they haven't expended the funds and they don't anticipate doing it this year because there's been positions left open, why wouldn't we require those funds to be used? And then, as you look at, for example, I'll just pick out victim coordinator services. You've got the request for this year is 167,000. The committee's recommended 124,000, but that only used up 16,000 of their $50,000 cash on hand. Why wouldn't we put in 50,000 in the first column, recommended use of cash on hand, and either add that so that their funding request is either fully complied with, or reduce that from the recommended use of new Riverboat funds? Scott, is there any policy reason that you would see as a basis to allow operational expenses to be carried over or not applied?
So I think what you're describing is a first in, first out approach. Funds you've already given the departments should be used before you give them more money. And that is certainly a logical approach that is perfectly valid. I'm just commenting on, I guess I just want to comment on the center column in the spreadsheet, represents what the departments have requested. So, they're requesting nearly $3.5 million. And what they're telling you is that that's what they need to run their programs. And if that stays the same a year from now, and their programs still cost that much to run, you're going to need to ask yourself where that money's going to come from.
Right. It either comes from, and again, in the beginning, when we've looked at it in external grants, the preference has been for capital projects so that if the fund source goes away, we're not eliminating something that's functioning. At the county side, we did that a little bit differently, in part based on the nature of the agreement with the Grand Victoria Foundation, because that did anticipate we would fund ongoing projects. But we do have and so if the future board's focus was to maintain the operating projects, we could do that by cutting out the capital projects here. Or you could go the opposite way. You could say we want the general fund and other county resources to fund our ongoing projects and then exclusively use this for capital. The reason we didn't do that one way or the other in the past is we had significantly more money in the original grant process. When the Riverboat revenue was significantly higher, we didn't have to make that decision. But the 7-year budget program has worked us to the point, time flies. I thought it was just a few years ago, but Mr. Berger corrected me saying it was 7 years ago. But I think from a policy perspective, if we have cash on hand, that should be applied, or to the extent that what's recommended is less than what we're allocating this year, I would say we beef up what's available and let them use their cash on hand, knowing that next year it's going to be the following year may be more difficult. Now, one other thing, if we get back to normal and the revenue from the Riverboat comes back up to where it was before, we may be able to sustain this a lot longer, but we'll just have, that's a wait and see situation. Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've got a concern about this, Scott. A couple of concerns that I kind of like more clearly explained to me. I'm not quite understanding. On the Grand Victoria Riverboat Fund fiscal year 2021 budget worksheet, on the bottom of that, you have projected unobligated year-end fund balance calculations. And as of 11/30 this year, it looks like there's $5,947,000 and change in there. Next year, the projection is $4,214,000. And I take it that's because of the reduction we're anticipating in the revenue coming in from the Riverboat. If in fact that's the case, you know, I almost wonder if we shouldn't leave some projected unobligated fund balances in there, because next year we're going to have a real problem. If our revenue is cut in half from the Riverboat and they don't have cash on hand, we're compounding the problem. So I really don't know if I'm looking at that inaccurately or if that makes sense, but I am concerned with the fact that, you know, with the Riverboat, we had a very good year this year. But, you know, I think realizing next year it's definitely going to be down, we need to leave some funds in there that we're not using. And, you know, so I don't know if I'm really 100%.
Maybe I can address that first, and then Mr. Berger can do it. You know, I look at this, I've always looked at this a little bit differently than a budget for a governmental entity, because as we saw, for example, with the budget discussion we had at finance this morning, when we look at a budget deficit this year, and we have an emergency fund set aside, it's appropriate to set aside reserves for what I'll call operating governmental entities, because those entities continue to exist, right? And it's prudent. One could argue that fund balance in this, you know, we want to sustain the program long-term. It's important when we set up programs that are operational pursuant to the agreement with Grand Victoria that we have long-term funding in place for them, because that was really the purpose of the program. However, having a huge fund balance in a program where we're basically supposed to be handing out grants isn't as critical as it is to have a reserve fund for an emergency, okay? I guess I've looked at that a little differently. And so in this case, the projected $6 million to $5.9 million balance, if that were to go down to 4.2 million and we maintain that, in perpetuity, that's a major cushion. That's enough for a full year's worth of internal and external grants that we've got in reserve. And knowing that this year is somewhat of an anomaly, hopefully, I think we could adjust for that. But what we're going to need to do longer term is that $4 million reserve, if we said we're going to just maintain our non-capital programs, is enough money to do that for several years to allow the county to adjust it if we had the worst case scenario. So I'm comfortable if we adjust that based on these calculations, given the coronavirus situation, to allow for that. And you know what, in the future, the decision will be for future boards whether projects like farmland, I'm picking on farmland preservation because that's a significant program and it's had major support. But is that program something that has priority over, victim coordinator services or drug prosecution or the other?
What the fuck thinking?
Ms. Allen?
And I will just jump in to say that I'm greedy. When any money that we put into farmland preservation, at least so far, gets matched by the feds. So this is just a way of getting our own money back, and in a cause that is in perpetuity. I'm getting the word wrong. Lasts forever. So
Perpetuity.
Yeah. In perpetuity. So that's the reason that I've been willing to back this request every year is just to get our share of those funds.
Mr. Berger, I cut you off. I'm sorry, but did you have a comment on the fund balance?
I did want to add to your comment regarding the budget worksheet, Mr. Leonard. The reason we share all this information with you is so you can have kind of a sense of what's around the corner. So I just want to call your attention to a couple facts here. So this budget document assumes that you're going to let the departments spend just over $500,000 that they currently have. And then you're going to allocate and plan to spend next year $4.2 million out of Fund 120. Now, when you go down to the fund balance projections, what you'll note is that Tracy has calculated what you're on, if everything at the top happens and you approve it and it happens, and if the revenue, unfortunately, is half next spring what it was this spring, then she is projecting that your cash on hand, your unobligated fund balance in Fund 120 will be just over $4.2 million at the end of fiscal 2021. That won't be enough to replay this budget for 2021 because you can see the 4.21 million is less than the 4.229.
And that's with the reserve of 1.727 million too, isn't it? Unobligated balance, I mean.
There wouldn't really be a reserve at that
I mean,
point.
unobligated balance.
Correct.
1.7 million, yeah.
Correct. So what we want to be careful of is that we don't overpromise the dollars. So that's why we keep such close track of what you've already promised to external entities as well as internal entities. And that's why we focus on the unobligated balance so that you know how much money is available or projected to be available that is not attached or committed to any use.
Could I ask Mr. Berger one other question on that then? Projecting that on November 30th of 2021, there's going to be a balance of $4,214,000, and projecting that the Riverboat proceeds are going to be half of what they are this year. I don't see how we come up with $4.2 million because I look at unobligated balance of 1.7 and then half of the $4.2 million, which is 2.1, and I come up with 3.8 million.
Tracy, you want to weigh in on this? I think we're looking into the calculation on that.
Okay,
I see your question though.
Well, if we're concerned about fund balance, I guess the question for the committee from a policy perspective is if we're concerned about maintaining a fund balance, if you can you go back, I'm sorry, to the spreadsheet, the colored one, please. If we're consider about maintaining a fund balance, what I would recommend doing is take all of the unobligated fund balance, recommend that that be used entirely. I mean, well, let me back up. If the policy of this committee is to be conservative this year because of concern about future revenues and the health of the fund, and we decide that it's $2.8 million that we want to invest in these programs this year, my recommendation would be to force the departments to use their fund balance as part of their program and reduce the new use of funds so that our fund balance can be restored by doing that.
Yeah, there's one or two ways of handling it.
Right,
Yeah.
and so in future years, then you've got a clean slate in terms of, because if you chose next year to eliminate a program completely and it has a fund balance, what do you do with that fund balance there? Do you take it away? If you use it now in this next year, and it isn't going to be used by the end of this year, but you're going to use it next year, then you can evaluate every program on its face, starting with a zero balance. So I guess the question is, as it relates to that, I think we should decide in terms of our recommendation, whether we enhance this year's allocation by beefing up the use of funds to use all the unobligated fund balances, or alternatively, whether we require all the use of funds and we reduce the recommended, the middle column, the recommended funds by the difference, or I guess the third way is to leave it as it's presented. Recognizing that if we're not, with respect to the last item on the list, if it isn't the will of the committee to fund the community outreach coordinator position, then we would theoretically remove that because $8,300 isn't going to fund that. Mr. Berger.
We have some background on that unobligated fund balance calculation, Tracy. Thank you.
So if you look at the budget worksheet, there's actually net income that's going to be saved in your account of $391,906. So the $4 million revenue that you received in April of 2021 plus the projected interest is going to be $391,000 more than what you would need if you funded everything. So that's money that goes into your savings account.
So that is interest income, right? Or is that net income?
It'll be it's net income, but it could be a combination of the revenues plus the interest.
And that's projecting that interest rates are down and everything else too?
Yeah, that's based on the projection calculation that finance provided us for our budgeting process.
Thank you very much.
And then the other piece of that is that you did save some money on your externals this past year. You did not award everything that was budgeted. So between that, it all kind of goes in.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, so back to our spreadsheet. Then we've got the future fund balance issue corrected. What is the pleasure of the committee? I guess the goal of today's meeting is to move on to the executive committee, then the full board, and approve budget for next year. Dr. Iqbal?
Yes, I have communicated with Chris Dahl my concern about using the cash in hand versus recommended use that you discussed at length. My feeling was if the available cash at hand is $551,000, but we are using 600, that is odd.
Doesn't make sense. Okay, so here's what, if you look at that, if you look at farmland preservation, what you're suggesting is the projected unobligated balance shows in that column, the first column is 451. And then if you go over to the recommended use, we've got 600,000. How could that be?
Yeah.
It's 150 short, but farmland preservation is asking to use 481,669 of their cash on hand in their budget request, but in the first column, it shows they have zero cash on hand. So that's
No, the first column shows they have zero unobligated cash on hand.
all right. So that's the difference between the two.
Right, so to answer Mr. Iqbal's question, there is money there, but it has been obligated, and now the department is asking to spend it.
Yeah, and my second question is, they don't want to spend the money, which is the cash on hand, rather they are requesting newer money.
Right.
And that was the discussion that we had, that they should spend what they had and then ask for more if necessary, rather than keep what they have. I don't see this as dollar is a dollar.
Yeah, I think what we've done historically is a good job of stretching out the use of the funds as best we can. But yeah, to your point, I think this would be easier understood from an accounting perspective if we had one other column that said total fund balance, obligated, unobligated, and that would answer your question. Then the numbers would add up. Because if you're asking, what doesn't make sense is then in the second column, where did the 418 that farmland preservation wants to spend come from? That came from an obligated fund balance that exists.
Right, that program has in excess of $3 million in the fund right now, but those dollars have been obligated.
And the reason it's put in as a request for use was because
Now it's time to spend it.
they want it in this program so they can disperse it this year.
Correct, correct.
And when we say it's obligated, it means that properties are under contract going through the grant cycle with the federal government.
Correct.
All right. Ms. Allen?
Yeah, no offense, Mr. Chairman, but you've kind of picked the anomaly in this group. Farmland preservation has a long list of properties where farmers are actually willing to sell the rights. And it's a process to get all of that work done, the survey work, the testing on the soil. We're not allowed to purchase unless the soil is the highest quality.
No, I
And so
think we acknowledge that. I'm not picking on farmland preservation. I'm using that as an example. If you read this chart on its face, there's a missing element, and that is what caused Dr. Iqbal's question in the first place, because the numbers don't add up. But the issue is, okay, let's cover this one of two ways. Do we think as a matter of policy that unobligated fund balances should be used up before we allocate new money?
Good.
Do we want to take a consensus from the committee to do that or not? Ms. Allen, you approve, Dr. Iqbal?
Yes, I approve.
Mr. Leonard?
Yes.
Okay. Is Ms. Lewis with us? All right, she's not here this morning. I would concur with that consensus. So the consequence of that would be to shift over to the recommended use of cash on hand, all of the funds that are in the, unless they exceeded what was requested for the year. So, for example, tuition reimbursement will still have a 29,000 left over because we don't need to give them new Riverboat funds because they have it in their fund balance, okay? So if we move those over to fund whatever is requested, then the second question would be regarding the recommended new Riverboat funds. Do we want to leave that the same? Or, I'm sorry, we just lost that. Or do we want to increase that by the amount that it was augmented by the cash on hand? In other words, do we want to keep the total spend at 2.8 million, knowing that that's a conservative amount, or do we want to increase it by the amount that the cash on hand increased their funding, up to the amount of the total request? Dr. Iqbal.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, one item I want to remove from this list, that's the community outreach coordinator.
All right.
Yeah, I will move that. That should be removed from the.
All right, so there's Dr. Iqbal's requesting that the community outreach coordinator be eliminated from the list. That's a item that's there. What's the input from the rest of the committee on that? Mr. Leonard?
Well, I have no problem in doing that, but I think then we should also eliminate the $8,333.
Right, that would be the,
that's the
Both of
intent.
those at the same time.
That's the intent,
Yeah.
yes.
consequence of doing that. Ms. Allen, what's your perspective on that?
I will agree with what the committee wants to do here on this. There's a part of me that would like to have a placeholder amount. I'm going to compare it to last year when we set aside $27,000, I believe, saying that Kane County might want to do a commercial sometime. If we stumbled on the right vendor, we might want to be able to do that, and this was a way to set aside money. I don't know if the next chairman will want to consider continuing this program, but I'm just putting into the ether that there could be a placeholder amount. Maybe we'll just keep that in the ether and let the next chairman struggle with it.
Well, that could be subject to an application for the following year or a budget
Right,
adjustment
yeah.
mid-year if it became a priority, knowing that this is a fund of, again, it's not an operating fund, it's a benevolent fund that's used for funding programs that are grant-oriented. Mr. Fraz, you had a question?
Yeah, I would just like to speak to the issue of the community outreach funding. We've seen this program grow from 0 viewers to, I believe it's over 20,000 at this point. I'm not sure, but it seems like I just saw something along those lines. I remember specifically one of the reports Mr. Nagel gave where it went over 8,000 and we're all excited. Now here we are at 20,000. This has been supported by this committee and the board for 6 years consecutively. It's a relatively small ask. I believe it should be funded for next year, and as has been discussed already, the new board and the new chairman should have a say on that, but it should be funded for next year. If there's a gap in that, you lose your audience. You spend a lot of time building an audience. It's there. I get a lot of comments from people, especially other elected officials, that look at it every day. So I'm supportive of this. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I know Mr. Nagel's here. If he would like to speak, I would ask the board to indulge him. But I would ask you to support this. And it begs the question, what has changed? What's changed since the last 6 years?
I think your point's well taken, Mr. Fraz. I will say that out of the discussion items in terms of change, just from a big picture budget perspective, this, as difficult as this budget is to put together, when we've gone through the grueling task of putting the county budget together, and we've been short on expenses every year, despite the success of the program or the viewership of Kane County Connects, it's been brought up every year. There's a county match to this, so it's 50,000 here, but it's another 60 or 70,000 plus or minus on the county side. And as when I deal with elected officials and department heads and talk about them being conservative in their budget, one of the areas that they bring up, and a lot of board members brings up, are areas that they see as discretionary. So I just want to point that out. I mean, it's bigger than just our budget here. So those are things that we've had to take into account. I think the money that's been invested in the program to date has been wise, and it's been helpful. But again, the issue going forward is as you're deciding to use resources that are becoming more and more limited, where are the priorities? So, all right, so from the committee's perspective, at least, and again, this is a committee of 5 that we move on then to the executive committee and the full board. It sounds like the consensus of the committee is to eliminate that funding, at least in the recommendation that we're going to make. All right, so the next question is, if we did that, then just by some simple math, the 2.8 goes down to, all right, I'm relying too much on the screen in front of me, which keeps going on and whatever. We take 8,000 off of that.
0.872.
Yeah, or 2.782.
If we do the tuition reimbursement to the 2 of them.
Well, and we move all right, so if we move the use of cash on hand up to the total amount of what their fund balance was, not to exceed their request, then the question is, are we going to reduce the new recommended funds for those line items accordingly, or are we going to increase them to increase the bottom line. And I guess the question is then, are we going to put it in a different frame of mind? If we approve the 2.8 number that's there, less the 8,300, we would be in part starting the reduction in reliance on the Riverboat for some of those programs. If we choose not to, we could adjust, we could enhance the allocation to them by allowing to increase those that were, I don't want to say shorted, but were not fully funded, by enhancing it by their unobligated fund balance. And I guess I need to know the pleasure of the committee on that so we can give staff direction. Dr. Iqbal?
Mr. Chairman, I would like that number to be reduced by 800, 8,333, and the net amount that I come up that I would like the committee to approve is 2,797,218.
All right.
That's the net number.
So your suggestion is that we don't increase the last column, we reduce the middle column by any adjustment that would have resulted from an increase of use of cash on hand.
The recommended fund also would go down by the same
Correct,
amount.
right, by the same amount. All right, so that's Dr. Iqbal's recommendation for the committee. I'll take input from the other committee members. Mr. Leonard, Ms. Allen. Ms. Allen, you're prepared to
I'm
speak?
sorry, just, can I just use as an example of what you're thinking, Mr. Chairman? The Title 4D.
Right.
Okay, they've got 6,000 sitting in hand.
So we increased that, the first column would go up from 3,000 to 6,000, and then the middle column would go down by 3,000 because we
Okay, so,
increased it, yes.
okay, so the 3 would go to 6, and the 72 would go to 69. And
Right.
so we
and
end up with the
So
same.
the right-hand column would remain the same.
Okay.
That's what Dr. Iqbal's suggesting. Now, there's some, it may not be as simple as that. Is there a reason why this keeps going? Okay, so if you go to, for example, the victim coordinator services, that would have the same effect there. Domestic violence would have a significant reduction in the new funds committed. I'm just trying to find one where there is a amount. Cost share drainage would go down in the middle column. So I don't really see, yeah, that would be the result of it. There isn't, I was trying to find one. Well, okay, so the tuition reimbursement. The result of doing this would be that everyone's projected unobligated fund balance would be exhausted except for tuition reimbursement, because tuition reimbursement's only requested 50,000 this year, which is the annual request, and they've got a $79,000 balance.
And the quality of Kane grants and from the Development Committee, they're only asking for 20.
20, and they would have a balance left over as well, right?
Uh,
So there'll be some tweaking. Mr. Berger?
We did advise all departments to plan to attend the meeting today, either virtually or in person, so they could answer questions that you might have about their budgets, and also advise you how any changes you make might affect them.
Right.
And Jody Wolnick is here to raise some concerns.
Good morning, Jody.
There was just an error on the sheet. We are actually requesting to use the full unobligated fund balance for cost share drainage of the $58,700. Our total program amount for this year is $243,700, which would leave a remaining balance of 0 at the end of 2021. The column of the recommended new Riverboat funds would not be impacted, so it's just the bottom line number and the complete use of the cash on hand.
So if we agreed to that, all right, okay, I understand what your comment is, and before we address that, I'd like to get back to the original thought that we were going through, and then we can talk about an exception to that rule as it relates to cost share drainage.
It's just, I think it's just an error in the spreadsheet. We were actually using the entire unobligated funds for
All right.
cost share.
So is the consensus of the committee then to act consistent with Dr. Iqbal's recommendation, ignoring what Ms. Walnick just said, and I'll cover that in a minute, to require the use of unobligated fund balance and reduce that from the recommended new funds? All right. Mr. Berger, do you follow that direction?
Actually, I was going to look to Tracy to find out if you captured all those items in the spreadsheet. We're following you, yes.
All right, so then the question becomes, with that, one could argue that we've made a prudent decision in starting the process of reducing the external program to take into account future reductions in funding in order to continue to sustain the program. But now, we did such a good job of doing that. Now the question is, are we willing to allocate, all right, someone's, okay, when we did our calculations as a committee, at least our recommendations, we recommended that the cost share drainage program this year be funded with a total of $179,000. And now Ms. Wolnick is asking for us to increase that by another $40,000.
Yeah, I think what Ms. Walnick is saying that if you add, instead of, if you add the 58,700 of unobligated funds to the 185 requests, that's going to give you the 243 that you need.
Right.
The new
the
requested
consequence of that,
riverboat funds would not change.
Right, I think we understand that. The consequence is then now the 2.8 million goes to 2.84 million because we increased the spend by 40,000.
But that's from unobligated funds, so the amount being taken from the riverboat funds is not anymore.
Yes,
Recommended new riverboat funds, the second to last column on the right before the last column. We're not changing that figure, we're just changing the recommended.
well, we would reduce that less, but the total column on the right-hand side would increase from 2.8 to 2.84 million.
Yeah, right.
All right, what's the committee's pleasure on that request? Ms. Allen?
I'm sorry, I'm still back on old money and new money. I thought that what we got the year before from the riverboat was about the 3.6 million. And so we were going to put about 800,000 of that into external grants. And then that left us with the 2.888 for internal grants. And that was spending the stipend that came in that year. So if we're actually talking here about new riverboat funds and the column at the moment is at 2.2 million, then we're 600,000 less than the amount we were planning on spending.
Then what was
I'm
requested?
sorry, I just don't get this.
What was requested was 2.88, and what we're recommending is 2.2 million. They're requesting in the blue portion. This year, they're requesting 2.
This was not our.
That's a worksheet. No, that.
But wasn't that our budget? Wasn't that?
Well, we have 4.2 million we received this year, but, I
Well,
hate
no,
such
but
stuff.
no, we weren't going to spend the 4.2. We were going to, because we wanted to save some of that for bad times.
Yes.
But the amount that I thought we were going to spend was a similar amount that came in the year before. We weren't
I
going
don't
to.
remember last year's. All I know is this year, from the member recommendations, we're recommending spending 2.2 million of the riverboat funds. And then we're also recommending that use of cash on hand is another 600,000, which brings us to 2.8 million.
All right, Mr. Berger's attempting to show us the impact of the adjustments we talked about in real time? So that your pencil and eraser, Bill, you don't have to use.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
this.
shouldn't be using a pen.
But, as we wait for that, then let's get back to this cost share drainage discussion. If Ms. Wolnick is requesting 240,000, and we had previously recommended in 180,000 roughly, given her explanation, is the committee inclined to allow the entire 240 to be spent this year, or do we want to keep it to the 179 that was originally recommended?
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? If Jody is still around, was the 245,000 for promises made to various projects for this next year?
That is correct. That was what was originally submitted by our department, and it was just incorrectly allocated on the spreadsheet.
No, but 58 was committed already, was the 100 and, so if this was done correctly, Jody, you've got 58 that's shown as unobligated. That's, what you're saying is that's obligated to projects?
Correct.
All right, so do you have 185 also obligated to projects?
Correct.
All right, so that's already allocated, notwithstanding the
approval.
fact that we didn't fund it.
Correct. That was our request for 2021, was the total amount of 243,700.
So you have $243,000 in projects. When you say committed to projects, what do you mean, or what do you
We
mean by
mean
that?
we've had meetings and the projects are ready to go pending the approval of this committee with the funding.
So you've got eligible projects. We don't have a contractual commitment.
Correct.
It's contingent upon us allocating it.
Correct.
All right. All right, so with that background, what's the committee's pleasure on the cost share project? To allow moving the 54 that was previously shown as uncommitted to the use of funds for this year and fund the entire request, or are we going to pare that down? The consequence of paring it down is it would be less projects that would be able to get done this year, and they would be moved to next year, perhaps.
That's correct. One of, with the amount that was allocated, we would lose one of the projects. The Windings project would not be able to be funded based on the recommendations of the spreadsheet.
Okay. All right, so that's the consequence. So the question is, what is the will of the committee? Mr. Leonard?
Well, I think, first of all, and I hate to muddy the waters here, but that 58,700 for cost share drainage in unobligated, it is unobligated because these contracts haven't been signed, but it is intended, if that's correct.
Correct.
So if we add that 58,000 to the 185 that the Riverboat funds are recommending to give, is that I just want to make sure I got the same number. No, we're looking at 169. And then where's the cash on hand of 9,783?
No, that was recommended use of the 58. Only 9 of it was
Oh,
recommended.
okay, I see. So if we use all of it, we'll go from 9,783 to 58,700. And then the Riverboat recommendation is 170.
Right.
So we're going to be a little bit less than what you need to fund all your requests, but it's going to be close.
No, so, here's the issue. Should be simple math. If we're going to be consistent with this line item, what we would do is shift the 58,000 to being used this year, and then we would reduce the new amount requested by 58,000, or in this case, because 9 was already allocated,
49,000.
by 50,000. And the total amount allocated to cost share drainage this year would be 179,000. The consequence of that is that a number of the projects that are ready to go would be done, but one wouldn't, and that would be moved to the following year.
Yeah.
The other option is to say, since we've got all the projects there, do we want to completely fund them? And we could do that by allocating more money. That would deviate from the plan that Dr. Iqbal had suggested with respect to that one line item.
I don't want to do that.
Mr. Leonard says he doesn't recommend that. Does any,
I mean, I recommend taking the 58,700,
Using
but
it.
not increasing our
right,
funding.
so
from
your,
the-
your recommendation would be to leave cost share drainage at 179.
Yes.
Okay. Or actually, it would, yes,
Yeah,
179.
Well, no, actually it'd be more than that. Unless we're reducing the recommended new
But
riverboat
if you're
funds.
recommending we treat that consistent with all the others that we've talked about, is what you're saying. Right.
Well, we're actually reducing then the recommended new riverboat funds. If they're going to put an extra 50,000 into that, and we're still only going to allocate 179,917, then we're reducing the riverboat,
The new
recommended
riverboat
riverboat
recommended,
funds.
correct, right, yes.
We were following the direction of the committee from last year, which was to reduce our unobligated fund balance to zero. And
Right.
so we reduced our request of new riverboat funds based on the use of those existing funds on hand.
Sure.
And so if you were to further reduce, right now at the recommended amount, we're going to lose one project. If you were to keep the total amount at 179, we'd lose additional projects to that one.
So it'd be more
You'd
than
have
one project.
180,000 in projects for this year, basically.
Which would reduce more than one because our requested budget is 243.
Right.
So that's a significant hit to the budget beyond what anybody else is seeing on this recommendation list.
Correct. That's the consequence of doing it. Yes.
As you said, Mr. Chairman, before, it's kind of a difference between capital and operational. And again, the cost share is an anomaly in that it is a capital request. I'm inclined to go with the capital request because of their, because they make commitments to the land or to the subdivisions where people will live forever, or someone will live for a long time. I tend to think that spending money on capital projects is worth doing.
Right. Mr. Leonard?
Mr. Chairman, maybe I wasn't clear on that. What I am recommending is that they use their $58,700 in unobligated funds in addition to the 169 that we're recommending. That way you only lose one project.
Correct.
You're not getting the 243, but you're getting enough that you can do most of the projects except one. If we
So you're
reduce-
suggesting we deviate from Dr. Iqbal's plan as it relates to farmland or cost share drainage only?
Yes.
Ms. And is that consistent with your understanding?
Yes.
Do you support that, Dr. Iqbal?
Right.
Yeah, that's fine if, but my question is, what if we leave it at 179 that we have put? What would happen? I mean, you have some project that would not get done this year, it would be done
We
next year?
lose over half the projects we intended to build next year. We lose approximately half the projects because 179 to 243 in rough math, that's $60,000 of our budget that would be not be able to be used. And most of our projects are around $15,000. So we'd lose about 5 projects.
Five
doing it
projects,
that
okay,
way.
so, but next year you will be able to do them?
No, because we're seeing further reductions next year. So we don't anticipate to be able to build any projects next year based on the current numbers presented by Mr. Berger.
Well, it would just push the projects back.
You
and
push the
numbers
project, I
would
mean,
go-
that's the reality. If we don't have funds, we don't have funds.
Yeah, no one here is challenging the value of the program. It's been a great program, and the work our staff has done in dealing with the public and coordinating is unbelievable, really. But the issue is, where do we allocate our resources? And that's the judgment call here. So the consensus of the committee on that is to allow for full funding short of the 9783 that was in that column. So do you follow me? We would increase the use of cash on hand in the recommended use of cash on hand from 978333 to 587. is what is what the committee is recommending. And we've done that. Actually, the committee recommendation, if you go, you've done it already in the right-hand column, but to be consistent, you would do that in the middle column as well.
So what Tracy's prepared here.
Right.
So what Tracy has prepared is, obviously, you know, this is what the department's requested. This is your average from your exercise, and this reflects the changes that we've tried to capture from your conversation. I think you want that number to change, but I'm not sure.
No, yes, we do. And that would go up by, I'll give you the number,
It would go up.
by 58,700 minus 9783.33.
Oh, he's got that in there already. It's the middle column that we'd have to.
Yeah, that's what he's doing right there.
Yeah, 169, that's it.
169,533.
Yeah, so that's the number right there. All right, and actually to be consistent, okay, your committee recommended average was 9783, but that changed based on the education we received today, so we can leave that the way it is if that's the will of the committee. So what you're showing on this spreadsheet, Scott, is okay.
Okay.
All right, this is what the consequence of what we have discussed would be, but this also needs to be updated. No, that's consistent. We don't need to change anything else. So if we look at the right-hand column now, we see the recommended uses of funds, the requests. I guess maybe when this is presented, we could also see projected unobligated fund balance unused. And the only column that would have unused fund balance would be tuition reimbursement, if I'm looking at this correctly, and you pulled it over.
Quality of
Back.
King grants.
Tracy, I believe.
And the quality of cane grants, right. Okay.
So I believe, no, that's not right.
But quality of cane grants, yes, that's it. Okay, you got it right there. But you don't need to put that in there now. All right, so we have, what we're suggesting then is this, if I understand the will of the committee correctly. We're recommending that whatever was itemized is the use of cash on hand. Now, I'm still frustrated. Can I speak about farmland preservation without being accused of trying to pick on the program? If we look at the unobligated fund balance on farmland preservation, it shows zero. But we're showing it the adjustment of 518. So let me just say this. We're using $810,000 which is a combination of unobligated fund balance plus committed fund balance from the prior year. That's the suggestion. The adjustments are the new money that we're allocating to the projects for this year, or programs, and then the bottom line is the total budget would be 2.921 million. And so, Scott, if we were to do this with using 2.11 in what I'll call new money, where does that leave us if we go back to our worksheet in connection with the projected fund balance for the following year?
We have to get a spreadsheet together and.
Would
share
that be
with you.
higher or lower than the 4.22?
I believe your unobligated fund balance would go up.
Okay, and so that puts us back in more in line with what we had done in prior years. All right. So I think we've worked our way to the point where we may be, subject to further input of the committee, able to have a motion to move forward with the recommendation as set forth in the 3 columns called adjustments. Actually, it would be 2020, instead of called adjustments, maybe we could retitle that 2021 budget recommendation from this committee. Is there a motion to do that? Mr. Leonard moves. Dr. Iqbal seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Bouchard,
Yes?
Allen,
Aye, but I would love to see I would love to actually see the numbers.
They're right there.
There,
Oh, I'm,
far right.
Right, keep going. She said yes.
Iqbal, Iqbal,
Yes.
Leonard.
Yes.
Motion carries. All right, next item on the agenda is consideration of the budget for 2021. That's what we did already, correct? Yes. And the schedule for next year. Mr. Berger?
So simply as an informational item, we've shared with you the last page in your packet is a projected schedule for how we would implement the 2021 Riverboat program, kicking off in January of 2021, the external application cycle, and ending finally in September with the county board's review and approval of internal allocations for 2022. Informational only.
Okay. Any questions on the schedule? Hearing none, I entertain a motion to adjourn. Dr. Iqbal, Mr. Leonard, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Scott, do you want these books back?